I spent most of my life thinking that I wasn't very smart. It was just because I wasn't learning the way I needed to learn. I found that when I did things, I learned it very quickly.
And what I wanted to throw in there, as far as the intelligence, that is a sad thing. The research shows on average that ADHD and dyslexic types have an IQ that's 10 points higher than the average.
I
So
love
they're
that.
actually more able, but the worst learning disability is poor self-esteem.
Welcome to ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. I'm your host, Jorie Houlihan. I'm an ADHD life coach, speaker, and your guide for the dopamine deprived. I myself was diagnosed with ADHD at 49. My guest today is Brian Mark Rigg. He is a Yale graduate and a Cambridge trained historian specializing in World War II, the Holocaust, and the intersection of religion and history. A former professor at SMU, retired U.S. Marine Corps officer. My dad was a Marine, Semper Fi,
Yeah, you're
and a veteran of the Israeli Defense Forces. He has conducted archival research in 18 archives across 5 countries. Rigg is the award winning author of multiple books, including Conquering Learning Disabilities at Any Age. He is known for combining rigorous scholarship with candid, thought provoking analysis. And this includes his 25 years of study on ADHD, that includes being somebody who lives with ADHD and dyslexia, as well as having a child who does. First things first, I just want to let you know you are the first man I have interviewed for this podcast. So, congratulations.
Well, thank you, Jory. Thanks for having
You're
me.
all right. So I just want to jump in. When you and I talked before, there were some really interesting things that came up. So I'm very excited about this. So you have described ADHD and dyslexia as evolutionary advantages. So
Mhm.
can you share how this perspective shifted your own understanding, self understanding, really, and what convinced you of this view?
Yeah, so Dr. Hartman wrote ADD success stories about 20 years ago, and he brought out these concepts that had been thrown around in our community about hunters and farmers, and that ADHD people are hunters, and the rest of the society that is the majority are the farmers. And so the people who are zany, crazy, imaginative, struggle in traditional school settings are usually the hunters. Hartman, talked about the society now being dominated by farmers, which is a very kind of boring way of looking at life, very passive learning. You have a teacher at the front of the classroom spouting information, and you have to remember it. You have standard ways of always doing something. You can't deviate from it, which is very un-ADHD. And so that is a very squashing thing for the spirit of an ADHD person to be in a farmer-like community. So when Hartman suggested there's these two communities, I was like, if there's scientific support for this, we should be able to go back into the historical record, from a anthropological point of view and see this evident in ancient man. And so when I first came across this, I talked to a famous scientist here at SMU called Fred Windorf. And he was interested in ancient man only if it was 20,000 years and older. And as I told him, I said, hey, is it in your opinion, correct to say that the vast majority of mankind back then was probably ADHD dyslexic types? And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. And so I started exploring it with that conversation. I read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, who gave me more support for this. I read Sperm Wars by Robin Baker, the head of the National History Museum in London. And I did a lot of other studies. And to make a long story short, I think what's novel about my work is helping people like you and I with ADHD and dyslexia realize that we were the reasons why Homo sapiens survived. Homo sapiens have been around for, according to most people, at least 200,000 years. So, for the first 190,000 years, what ensured our survivability, when you look at how our societies had developed up till then, they were hunter gatherers. They required the brains of ADHD and dyslexic people in order to be successful in what they did. So, ADHD, you have to have need for high adrenaline activity. And most of us know that ADHD types need a way, an avenue to express their energy, express movement, do sports, and so on. And if they're not doing positive activity, sometimes they go down the road of negative activity to get that adrenaline kick, get that dopamine, as you talk about. That's why in today's modern society, the three biggest communities of ADHD and dyslexic people are fighter pilots, special forces, prisoners.
Mm, yeah.
So now going back to the ancient man theory, which I think is really, really true. So our ancestors were living in the wild, hunting, gathering. And why did they not remain the dominant Homo sapiens? Well, 10,000 years ago, we had what was called the agricultural revolution. We started learning how to grow our food. Now, 100 acres of growing crops can support 100 people versus 100 acres for hunter and gatherers would only support maybe 5 or 10 people. So these farming communities exploded on the scene, populations. They built cities. They were the founders of really language, as we understand language now, and writing. So that's one reason why a lot of ADHD types struggle with language. We didn't create that. We created survival mechanisms. We created hunting strategies. We were really in tune with nature, but we hadn't developed the language and writing, which was requirement for controlling city states. And what happens with hunter and gatherer communities when they are confronted with farming communities, they usually get overwhelmed, exterminated, or assimilated. I just think of the Native American Indians and the European settlers. So that's why now we're not the majority, but for the longest time we were. And a lot of people might be asking, well, okay, I can understand maybe the high energy level that ADHD types help with hunting, but how does dyslexia help? Well, when I did a study on this, when you flip things, which is what happens a lot of times with people with dyslexia, they have a hard time tracking letters and whatnot because they're flipping them all the time. Well, when you're out in the wild and you're flipping the image that you have and you get the reverse image, you're able to notice nuanced detail that other people can't see. So for tracking, a broken limb where you're going after an animal, or camouflage when something is stalking you and you got to protect yourself. In fact, there was an interesting study I cite in my book that the best astrophysicists out there seeing detail that nobody else sees are dyslexic.
So
So
interesting.
yeah, it's fascinating when you start looking at this from a historical point of view. So I thought at the very beginning, besides telling people, "Hey, I know your story," because I not only have one kid, I have three kids with ADHD and dyslexia, and
It's very
the
heritable.
alphabet soup, and then of course my own struggle. And in analyzing my mother and father, I now know that they had issues as well because it is very much an inherited trait. So I thought it was very important for this book to set out at the very beginning that, hey, everybody who you have this, it is not a defect. Everybody in the world needs to be thanking us that they're here because of us. We ensure the survivability for the vast majority, 95% of the time, we ensured survivability of the human species. And now, when you know that that's what your mind is like, then you can gravitate to things that can give expression to a lot of success in your life, like being an EMT or a trauma doctor or a fighter pilot or a special forces operator or an entrepreneur, because that's what our brains were conditioned to do, to think out of the box, be creative, have high adrenaline activity, get that dopamine kick, and also to see things that other people don't see. And so I gave historical evidence for that theory, and I promote it every time I talk to, especially little kids, and telling them that they have greatness within them and something that ensured the strength of our species, not hurting it in any form or fashion.
I love that you do that. These kids sometimes when they have a diagnosis of any kind, of course, it tends to make them very insecure. And I told you earlier that there's a woman I know, and she goes in, talks to students, and they're all kind of quiet and they don't really want to admit they have ADHD. But she does the same thing where she talks about like their creativity and they're innovators. And by the end of it, they're all like, I have it. And they're proud of it. Right. And so
Mm.
I love that they're starting to own it and that the quote unquote label is, I think, slowly but surely making its way to be something that it is something to be proud of and to not shy away from the way that we kind of did when we were younger, you know? All right. So then reflecting on your own personal journey with this, what were the most impactful turning points in overcoming the learning labels and the setbacks that you faced as a child?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Back in the 70s, there weren't a lot of resources for me. And first, I have to just thank my saintly mother, Marilee Rigg, who's highlighted in the book an awful lot. She moved from a very small little town, Beaver, where she and her sister and I think a cousin were the only students in the entire school.
Oh my
And
gosh.
they moved to Oklahoma City and was put into a public school. And she struggled. She was 10 years old. She had a hard time with the curriculum, interacting with other people that weren't her family. And she was waiting by the staircase when she overheard her teacher talking to the principal above her, saying that Davidson girl is the dumbest girl I've ever had in my class. Now, my mom remembered that when I started having trouble. And she said, over my dead body, will my son go through that? Because she struggled and she still struggles to this day from that experience. And nobody back in the 50s, 40s, and 50s knew how to handle. My mom was born in 37, knew how to handle kids with these issues. So she got me into Easter Seal for my speech impediments. She got me at the Child Study Center in Fort Worth and started working the problem. She also came across an alternative to medications. They tried Ritalin on me and it did not work at all. And she put me on what's called the Feingold diet. And the basic principle that she took away from it is that the less artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives that you can have in your kids' food, the better they will behave. Now, whether people believe in this or not, because there's a lot of controversy around it, which I don't think there should be, the worst thing that can happen is that your kid's eating better food. The best thing that can happen to you, and I have scientific studies cited in my book, is that artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives are petroleum based products, and they mimic neurotransmitters of serotonin and dopamine.
Hmm.
So when you ingest this, since this is what you crave as an ADHD person, you create more static in the brain because you're giving it what it needs, but it's not healthy input. So you're not getting that by, jumping off a dock into a pond or fishing or hunting or, running on the soccer field and so on. That's where you get it naturally. So if you can do away, since we have a sensitivity, it seems like, to those artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives because of what our brain chemistry is desiring, if you can take that away, it helps the kid behave better. And when you study my child study report, Dr. Maddox saw a huge difference once my mom got me on that diet. Also, when you ask me what was really pivotal, of course, this is interviewing people and analyzing this. I interviewed almost all my teachers from kindergarten all the way those last 25 years. Many of them now have passed on all the way to college. I interviewed a lot of my teachers. One thing that was really pivotal that my mom did is where I failed first grade twice was also the church that my family went to. So every Wednesday night, Sunday morning, and Sunday night when I went to school, kids were pretty brutal to me, calling me moron rig, freak rig, alien rig was a moniker that a lot of people gave me because I had a hard time with speech. And then they knew I couldn't read. They would make fun of me on the board and write, letters, and I couldn't do it. I would struggle. I would try to, do it to prove them wrong, but it didn't work. So what my mom did is she got me to this wonderful school that there was only two in the nation at the time, and it was at TCU, Texas Christian University, and it was called the Star Point School. And the interesting history behind that is the Neely family, which the business school is named after, a multi-million dollar oil family back in the 60s, had a grandson that nobody wanted. And back in the 60s and 70s, when you had people with our genetics, quite often they were just kicked out of school. Hey, this kid can't learn. We don't know what they need. Get rid of them. And after their grandson got kicked out of like three schools, they said, well, hey, we have all this money. He's a good kid. He just can't learn. Why don't we just make our own school? So they went to TCU. They gave it millions of dollars, named the business school after him, but they also did this little project on the side for their grandkid, which was a lab school to study kids with learning issues and to help them learn how to learn. And so it had been in existence for 10 years when my mom got me there. Now, what was interesting at the school is that there was no grades. You learned by being given the next task as a reward. Hey, you could do geometry. Now you're going to do algebra. You got rewards, little plastic chips for doing something well and behaving well. And if you got like 40 in one week, you were able to do something really special, like go to the Olympic pool there at TCU and swim in the pool, or go to the stadium and play flag football. If you did things improperly and or behaved wrongly, the school that I went to before gave you licks. They spanked you with a wooden paddle. So I was really scared I was going to continue to get beaten at this new school. Of course, they don't do that anymore, but that was the reality back in the 70s. So this school just took away opportunity. So you saw a direct correlation that you got more benefits as you increase your meritocracy of being a good human and a good student and working with each other and being kind. And so this increased my self esteem dramatically. And I had a wonderful teacher, Mary Stewart, who, when she heard my story, and I still remember this like it was yesterday, I was 8 years old, couldn't read. I was eight, could not read. And she took me into her arms after she heard my story. And she said, Brian, you're not an alien. You're not a moron. You're not learning disabled. You're just learning different. And I'm here to help you find your strengths. And she showed me throughout the year how well I was doing. By the end of the year, I was doing geometry and algebra, and I was reading Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. She showed me, she said, Brian, you're reading at a level and doing math at a level that's much higher than all those kids that are calling you all those names at church. What does that tell you about their ability to ascertain your capabilities? And she got me to think like I'm in control of myself and I can do these things. I just do it differently. When I graduated Yale University, that teacher was there. I stayed in touch with her. She gave me a big hug at that end of the year. She says, you can do it. I was supposed to be there for 3 years, got through it in 1 year. Laura Lee Crane was the head mistress. She developed a lot of the pedagogic techniques to help LD kids. In fact, for my book, I was able to read her guide for all the teachers back in the 70s. And it was really novel how you dealt with ADHD people. So the old proverbial phrase, it takes a village. My mom got everybody involved. She got me involved with a lot of sports. After soccer games and everybody was drinking Coca-Cola and having a cupcake, I had an apple and orange juice. At birthday parties, my mom made me special all natural cake. And then when everybody was eating their cake with the red dye, icing and whatnot, I had my own. At vacation Bible school, when everybody had their Kool-Aid and their sugar cookies, my mom had prepared cherry juice or something of that sort for me, all natural. She got all the people involved, teachers and coaches, to buy into this. And then she found the resources for me with my speech impediment at Easter Seal, working on how to pronounce words, how to speak properly. And then I had this school that taught me how to learn and that I was smart and was capable. So those are the things that were really germane in helping me. So the
Mhm.
takeaways for the people who are listening, you got to find an environment that's interactive learning. Can't do passive learning. Second thing, get physical activity. Also, if you're going to use the all natural diet, get everybody to buy in with it and the kid as well. I told everybody I was on my diet and I knew if I didn't eat well, I couldn't control my emotions as well as I should be able to. And I would see
Mhm.
direct results of this. Whenever I went off on a Jolly Rancher or a cupcake, I felt a difference. So, get the control of the diet if you can, have a good diet, and then positive reinforcement. You can, and then have that school environment or that tutor like Easter Seal that is supporting the person and seeing their own progress, that they are doing better, that they can do it. So I guess those are some of the takeaways I would give you of what really helped me when I was a kid.
Your mom is amazing. I have a kid that really sitting in a classroom, not his jam. It's been really hard because he's somebody who he needs to do. He learns best by doing. And he's incredibly smart. That's what's so frustrating is he doesn't think he is sometimes because he struggles with this stuff. I wish that schools would have different modes of learning for how the kids learn, right? I talk about this frequently, and I know it's a pipe dream at this point, but having the teacher say, okay, so for my visual learners, you're going to do this. For my auditory learners, you're going to do this. And for my kinesthetic learners, you're going to do this, all for the same information, but how they absorb it is different. I mean, I can't imagine the difference that would make in our education programs.
Well,
And
what
these poor teachers are trying to do the best they can, but it's really, it's, it's hard.
you bring up a very astute point. about different learning techniques. What I found that's interesting in my studies is, I mean, let's think back about hunters and farmers. Hunters were learning from a father or a grandfather, or a hunter, if you were a female population, you're learning from a mom or a grandmother, how to find the berries, what plants to eat, what medicines are good. The men are going out, this is how you track this animal. It's very intimate, interactive.
Hmm.
Now, farmers are like, okay, this is how we plant at this time, this is the way you do it, this is how you cut the field, bang, bang, bang. But it's very methodical, very mechanical, if you will. Now, when you get to the farmer hunter mixing of the classroom, like you're talking about, visual and active learners and so on, audio learners, if you take everybody into an active learning environment, whether they're farmer or hunters, they learn it. If you take hunters into a farming academic environment, they'll never learn. So everybody benefits from a more active learning environment. But you're right. Public schools, God bless these teachers, they have too many kids. They don't have the support. They can't do the discipline and so on. So quite often where you find this is with tutoring or you go to private schools if you have the resources. But that interactive learning is critical. And when you know the genetics and the history, you understand why somebody learns interactively when they're ADHD and
Yeah.
dyslexic. And I learned
Yeah.
that with myself as well as with my kids. And my parents were fortunate enough to be able to send me to small Christian schools here in Fort Worth that gave me the ability to be 5 to 10 people in one classroom.
That's awesome. So, for people who are listening, I know not everybody has the resources to do private schools, but just keeping this in mind and maybe even just communicating with the teachers that your kids have about things that will help your kid learn more effectively. You never know where that could lead because I know teachers get really frustrated and there's a lot of things they want to do, and I agree that I think if everybody does whatever it is, it's a doing kind of thing. I think everybody learns better. I mean, just in general, we need to be doing better in our public school situation, but this is
Yeah.
definitely where an area that I wish there was a little more focus on because it really
Yeah.
is so important.
The one place that I studied that really has it right, and for those who are listening who maybe have power that are on school boards and whatnot, take this to heart. There's 2 places where you have some of the best academic performance of kids anywhere in the world. Now, part of it is because of the cultures of both of the nations I'm about to give you. But another reason why is they pay their teachers at the level of doctors and lawyers, and that's Israel and Finland. They have smaller classrooms, they pay their teachers well, they train the teachers, and the kids are phenomenally well educated by the time they get out of high school. So that's something that's very important. For the people who, like you're talking about, who don't have the resources to go to private schools, and that's vast majority of America, we really need to get back to having mom and dad around the table at night. And what's very important about this is that girls quite often fall through the cracks early on who have ADHD. And I raised a daughter with these issues, and we were very mindful of this. And we even saw it with our own daughter. As we all know, girls want to be pleasers. They're quiet. They don't complain nearly as much as little boys, and little boys are acting out a lot more. So usually, girls sometimes are 1, 2, sometimes 3 years later in the game of being found, if ever. Like you just said you were found when 49 being diagnosed. Moms and dads out there, get around the table, and if you think Junior is the only one that has a problem, keep on talking to your daughter because it's 80% inherited, but it is primarily documented in boys still, unfortunately, although the research is coming out there of what to look for with girls. But if you see they're struggling, they're not tracking in school, that's also a place for you to bring your girl at the dining table to start interact with them and reserve 30 minutes, an hour if you can, of working with them on certain things. What I did with some of my kids is I would go on campouts with them and they were learning geometry or they were learning astronomy, and then we would actually do it.
Mhm.
We would learn about plotting courses, looking at the topography of the land, and they loved it, you know, and then looking at Orion and, looking at Jupiter and the moons and so on after they've learned about it. That was really engaging, and that's once again active learning. So if you can't do it because you're in a public school and the kid's doing the best he can with what he has there, you can supplement at home by creating that active learning environment. which is something I must say my mom and grandmother, her mother, were very good with me. I was raised by two single, strong willed women. My grandmother was the daughter of a pioneer, came over with a third grade education from Germany. And when he died, he was the third largest ranch in Oklahoma. Once again, the entrepreneurial mind, thinking out of the box. And he gave that drive to my grandmother, which was also given to my mom, and I benefited from it.
That was actually you kind of went right into my next question, which was about girls. I remember my son had been diagnosed with ADHD, and we went over to a friend's house, and it was the first time she'd met my kid. She was a newer friend, and my daughter is just wandering around checking out stuff in the house, and my daughter is, I think she was in going into 2nd grade, and my friend said, "She has it too." I'm like, "No, she doesn't." And then she was like, "And so do you." But I had been dismissed so many times by doctors. I'm like, "Yeah, well, I've tried and they don't think I do." But when I was diagnosed, then I really started to see what she was seeing in my daughter. And I had to fight to get her assessed.
Hmm.
But it made such a big difference because now she better understands why she struggles with certain things, etc. And it just makes such a big difference. But you are correct. When I would talk to her teachers and I would say, "Are you noticing anything? My son was diagnosed, whatever." My friend said they kind of thought she had it. And they'd be like, "No, no, she's fine." But then would turn around and tell me how messy her desk was and her locker. And even at the bare minimum, that's still struggling with executive functioning on some level. And I would just go, "Oh, yeah, you should see her room," because I didn't know anything about it at the time. Right. But that's the other problem is that teachers are still, I think, looking too often for boy signs in girls. And I think with so many women now getting diagnosed, I think the studies will get better
Hmm.
because now they're paying more attention because they have to. I mean, we weren't included in studies at all, I think, until like the early 2000s, kind of.
Hmm.
So, the fact that so many women started to get diagnosed, I think, can only lead to better studies, therefore, better information and better
Well, it's just like
tools.
the situation that the evidence is coming out that's horrifying to me, since a little bit more than 50% of the population are women, and yet their heart health is so different than heart health of a man. And we're just now learning this, it's just,
Yeah,
and so the ADHD, because we have relied on outward signs, the acting out. And of course, boys have a lot more energy, the testosterone, and so on. Girls have been ignored who have this, but they have it. The studies that I have cited in my book, they have it basically just as much as guys. I mean, think about it. When everybody was ADHD, I mean, you couldn't just have the male population that way and not the female in that environment and survive.
right.
So everybody was that way. What are the questions we need to ask of the girls versus the boys? And one thing that's very important for mothers and fathers to hear that I have cited is it's no newsflash that our society has struggled for a long time and still struggling with sexual abuse, pedophiles out there, and we do a much better job than societies in past of bringing these people to justice and bringing the information out to light. The Catholic Church, Boy Scouts, and so on. But this is why I'm bringing this up. 1 in 4 girls, according to some research, are sexually abused by the time they get out of high school. 1 in 8 boys. Now, the reason why I bring this up is that when they did studies of girls who have been sexually abused, they express ADHD like behavior. So when you find your daughter is ADHD or ADHD like, there's an additional layer of questions you need to be asking, because if she is having that behavior because of sexual abuse, there's a different type of therapy you got to have to do. You don't want to be sending her to speech therapy and whatnot when she's been traumatized. So that's the reality of our world, unfortunately. So, with that in mind, to best protect your little girls and take care of them, when you start seeing this behavior and you start diagnosing ADHD like symptoms, you need to have part of your quiver, the arrows of your quiver to help that child, is to go and ask questions to make sure that did not happen. So then you know exactly what to do, and that it really is learning differences that you have to be attacking and looking at.
That is something that does concern me a lot about having a daughter. I keep telling her she needs to take jujitsu or Krav Maga or something. And
I
she's
raised
like,
my daughter with kung fu.
All right, see, right? And
Mhm.
I'm just like, "You need to have something," because she wants to travel when she's older, and she wants to do it by herself, and I'm like, "Okay, I want you to do that, and I want you to be safe." Actually, this is a really great lead into my next question because you mentioned that trauma can mimic ADHD. In your opinion, how do families and clinicians distinguish between the two? And what early interventions, I guess, do you recommend? Because there's a lot of talk now about trauma causing ADHD. And I know that ADHD can cause trauma. I still feel the jury's out on whether or not trauma causes ADHD. I know it can change the brain, especially if it's a young person and it's a really severe trauma. But my main concern for people who do medication, you do not want to put somebody on medication who does not have ADHD. It's a completely different ballgame when that
Yes.
happens. Back to my questions, like how can families and clinicians distinguish between the two, and what are, again, early interventions?
Yeah, you bring up many excellent points and just kind of brainstorm with you. You know, the impulsive nature of ADHD people, they need to be warned about that even early on and the consequences. You know, there's a fine line between being a daredevil and having wonderful new experiences and being dead or being hurt or causing harm to others. Because you're
Mhm.
driving the car too fast, or you know, you're handling the jet ski in a crazy way, but you're not thinking of others, and so on.
Well, and you also mentioned earlier too that the prison population has a huge number of people who have ADHD that are probably not being treated for it, or
Yeah.
if they even know they have it.
Or they're self-medicating quite often with
Yes,
crack or
honestly.
cocaine, you know,
Right,
because
exactly.
adrenaline, I mean, Adderall and Ritalin are speed, and we need that extra kick. That's why the medicine is like it to be thinking normally, because we need that high adrenaline activity to function in life. Remember, we're hunters. So sitting in a classroom all day is a killer if you're not getting more recess, and that's another problem in a lot of our public schools. We're not doing an hour of recess a day, which we should. But that's another
Mhm.
topic. Now, getting to the trauma and how you can document it. I mean, as we talked offline before, I think it's very interesting for people to know that the doctors who initially were really looking at this were doctors that came out of World War II, and they were using their observation of what happened to men that had shell shock, psychoneurosis, brain trauma, and so on, and they labeled it minimal brain damage. And they took all that information and they observed little kids that were spastic and not able to learn, and they threw these acronyms on them: minimal brain damage, minimal brain dysfunction. That's what I was diagnosed with. And so it came out of an environment of trauma where they were trying to understand this population of kids that had a hard time learning and struggled in school environments. So getting to trauma versus, you know, just the genetics, you know, I think going to 2 to 3 different therapists is a good thing to do with these questions in mind. Help us ascertain that the kid hasn't been traumatized and that it really is just genetics, especially with your little girls, like I was telling you about with the horrible stats that are out there. And then later on, you know, when you have had trauma and you're dealing with ADHD, there's obviously different things you need to do for both. But if I'm tracking with your questions, I think the best thing to do with the kids is when you get them involved with, I believe sports is one of the best ways of doing that you see about impulse control, doing too much, not learning how to be a team member, not learning how to be situationally aware, also martial arts to some degree. That starts teaching you about impulse control and risk reward, and then putting them in stressful environments. And I put that in quotation marks, but you know, sending them to survival camps, getting them involved with Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, getting them involved with Sea Cadets or Young Marines. And the more you get them in environments that are controlled with good mentors, but are stressing them, they start to realize, okay, what I can do, what is acceptable, how can I prevent harm, but how can I also give expression to my curiosity? So that would be the way I kind of answer that. But you bring up some really good topics about, you know, trauma versus just regular ADHD mindset. And I think, you know, it's from what I understand from the studies, once they know about asking those questions, they're able to find out very quickly from the kid whether they are expressing traumatic behavior or ADHD like behavior. You shouldn't really rely on yourself. Just know we live in this environment that requires us to explore both areas. How you prevent it with the kid getting older? Phew, that's a tough one, Jory. That one I don't know exactly how to answer, and I don't remember a lot of studies going over it. We obviously with the veterans, we have a totally different way of dealing with them once they've gone through trauma. What's interesting is quite often if you've been medicated for, just had a glip, if you've been medicated for ADHD, a lot of times the military doesn't want you. However, they will tell you some of the best warriors out there, female or male, are ADHD. We're still coming to terms of learning how to deal with this situation and that it's okay to be medicated if that's what works for you, or not medicated and have this and still go into the military and be valued for who you are from your brain chemistry.
Yeah, I have a client whose daughter is in the military and refuses to get assessed because she does not want it to be held against her. But I think it's also one of the things that has made her successful in the military. I think it's just a matter of there are some people where they're super active and all this other stuff, and they still do require some medication. And then there are other people who are able to find the outlets that do seem to help, and they do okay without it. Everybody Medication is such a personal decision. So I'm always like, I meet people where they are with it. When I was first diagnosed, I was like, nope, I don't need it. Now that I know what this is, I can totally handle it. That was not at all the case. And medication, though, gave me the ability to be present enough to learn the skills that I needed. But I also know that there are some people like you who've been very successful with you've been able to do it like with the diet and all of that. But I've also seen people who they have very clean diets, they're very conscious of it and they still needed it. So the reason I talk about this is because like I said, if your ADHD like symptoms are not truly from ADHD, that's where you really have to be careful because that's where addiction starts to come into play much more so than if you have true ADHD. So,
And on that note, I mean, there are studies out there saying, okay, you have a kid that already has addictive personalities. ADHD has that addictive personalities, and then they're addicted to this high adrenaline activity. And then you give them speed, and then you're laying a foundation later on for them possibly to go down the road of cocaine and abusing of drugs and so on. There are some studies for that, just to be a warning sign. How do you teach discipline? How do you teach, okay, this is helping me be a better person because my brain chemistry is a little bit off. Dr. Ned Hallowell and I talked an awful lot about this, and there needs to be a better, I think, understanding from the medical community of looking at both
yeah.
diet and medicine at the same time. Usually the default position is immediately put people on medication. And maybe, you want to look at this person like, you know what, this person needs it, like what you're talking about. You say, hey, I see the benefits. This is great. Then the person over here, no, we don't want to give that to that person because they show all the inclinations that they are going to abuse it, or that they can't handle it. And they have other ways of maybe being able to control it. So, like I said, Dr. Ned Hallowell and I said, are agreed that usually the first line of defense, you should probably try diet and exercise. And if it doesn't work, then that's a good way of checking off the box. Okay, at least I tried it.
Yeah.
And then the medication usually always gives the people some type of sense of, like you're saying, calming down so they can focus better. The irony is we ADHD cousins, family members can get very hyper focused. That's what makes us such good
Mhm.
at entrepreneurs and that's what you want to do when you're in the wild. You're looking at everything, you're getting all these inputs and then bang, you want to focus on that hunt, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why attention deficit disorder is really a misnomer. It's not that you have a deficit of attention, it's that you pay attention to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, our frontal lobe doesn't filter out all the information that it should. So our brain that's why we forget people exist, right? If they're not in front of you on a regular basis or if there isn't something there to remind you, like that was one of my big ahas that I had. I mean, I'd been trying to talk to doctors for years, but then when I learned that, I was like, okay, that explains a lot. Like that's got to be what this is. And people don't realize that because they're like, well, how can you focus so much on this? But then when you have to do some boring, mundane task where there's no dopamine and you have no interest in it, you struggle with that. I'm like, because it has no dopamine and I have no interest in it. That's why. Like, like, and it's not entitlement. It is like physically painful.
Mm.
I think for people with ADHD to be bored, it's one of these things is like, how do you explain ADHD to people who don't have it? And, my husband, we're now pretty sure he has it too. But in the beginning, he's trying to figure out what we're doing because, he's like, I don't understand why you can do this, but you can't do that. And as I learned more and as I got all my, education on it, I was just like, this is why, he was like, oh, okay. It's still a hard thing for people who don't have it to get it. And I get it. It looks like laziness. It looks like entitlement. It looks like being not the most, intelligent person. I spent most of my life thinking that I wasn't very smart. And but it
Mm.
was just because I wasn't learning the way I needed to learn. I found that when I did things, I learned it very quickly.
Yeah, and what I wanted to throw in there, as far as the intelligence, that is a sad thing. That's why a lot of kids, when they get these, titles thrown at them, or they struggle learning, they start second guessing their own intelligence, and they think they're not as intelligent. The research shows on average that ADHD and dyslexic types have an IQ that's 10 points higher than the average.
I
So
love
they're
that.
actually more able, but the worst learning disability is poor self esteem. And I go into that. And that's something that we struggle with, ADHD,
Yeah.
dyslexic communities. And then I'm glad you overcame that. But you're an example of many people that thinking, okay, I'm not capable, I'm not smart enough, I can't do it.
And
And
it
that's the
it's
worst.
and it lingers. Like, I consciously understand it now, but it's still stunning to me how often I second guess myself and I don't trust my judgment because I spent my whole life being told I was doing it wrong. And I was just doing it differently, right? I was learning different, as your teacher said. And so I'm always trying to like encourage my kids and anybody that I know. I'm like, just start testing the waters a little bit. Just do it your way, see what happens. And the truth is that even if it doesn't work, that's one time it doesn't work. Like, just keep trying. That's how we learn. But don't not do it because you were told you were doing it wrong without truly trying it yourself. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Oh,
okay. So,
absolutely.
okay. So, for parents raising children with ADHD or dyslexia today, what resources, mindsets, or daily practices have made the biggest difference for your family that they may be able to try?
Well, as I've mentioned many times here, physical
Mhm.
activity is key. So get them involved with sports as early as you can, or physical activity. I mean, it can be dance, piano, have them doing something every, season, if you will. My mom had me playing pee wee football, and then I had basketball in the winter. And then, in the spring, I was playing baseball. And then I was doing martial arts also, and then doing a little piano on the side. So that was my own example. And I found that with my children. My daughter loved horses. She
Mhm.
loved archery. She loved martial arts. So we had her doing those activities all the time. My middle son really got into crew early on, rowing,
Yeah.
but he did baseball and soccer. He got that, and he's my mini me. He's very much like me, ADHD, dyslexia. And then my younger boy, he led the team, a 6A private school state championship parish episcopal in Texas. And he was the captain and linebacker of the team. So, he loves weightlifting. So that's very important, I think. And then, the second thing with the kids is if there is a certain weakness that they have, whether that be speech, reading, math, or something like that, don't be afraid to get some special tutoring if you can,
Yeah.
and really hone in on whatever that is their weakness, and then help them create a strength out of it. I mean, writing and reading was so hard for me, and I think, man, I was a glutton for punishment. I have 8 books now. It's like
That's
I was gonna
I
prove
love that fact about you.
I'm
You
gonna
know?
prove them wrong. I can do it now.
Yeah,
Um
exactly.
And then, I guess one of the on that note, try to teach them to listen to the people who are gonna give them constructive criticism and don't ever take it personally. That's the only way you're gonna get better. And really focus on your girls, because girls have a much harder time with taking that criticism and being able to filter it. Okay, this is not an attack. It's to make me better.
RSD is
And
a very real problem. And it is men and women, but just from my own experience, it can be brutal and trying to not take something personally. Sometimes I gotta like take a minute if I'm getting feedback, right?
Mhm.
And be
Well,
like,
what the beauty from female I mean, not that I'm an expert on male and female psychology, but the one thing that I did find with raising a daughter and being around those teams and being around girls and boys, and then some of the research, is that both kids, boys and girls, have hard time taking the criticism. Boys a little bit less so. But what's interesting, girls internalize it a lot more. But what's
yes.
interesting about the girls is they are much faster at learning because they don't want to get it again.
Hmm.
So if they know what they need to do and you teach them to be able to receive that, they're exponentially a lot faster at learning. And we kind of know this in many respects because some of the best students early on are girls. And then later on, when they get into the junior high and high school, and there's that pressure to be the prettiest, and who's dating who, sometimes they dumb themselves down,
Yeah.
which is another interesting thing. But by what I'm getting at early on, when they don't have that pressure, we see it. We see that when they get the right type of criticism, they are so much more eager to please, but also to learn so they don't get it again. They're like
Hmm.
wiser and smarter in this respect. And I saw that with my daughter. So I think another important thing is to really get the message around like, we love you no matter what. And when we tell
Yeah.
you this, it's nothing that's going to diminish our love. We want you to be better, but you got to do this, this, and this because you're not doing well here. And
Yeah.
if you continue to do this, you're gonna have problems, and we don't want you to have problems,
Yep.
and then
Yeah.
teach
I
them what
think,
you're wanting to teach them.
yeah, I think it is really important to have that part in there of, we're going to love you regardless. We're just trying to help kind of a thing. They say that kids who have ADHD that are untreated or undertreated by the age of 12 hear over 20,000 negative comments, more negative comments than their neurotypical peers by the age of 12.
20,000?
And I'm like, what does that do to a kid? Like and it's not always like abusive things. It is sit still.
Yeah.
Stop doing that.
Mm,
That kind of stuff. And it's stuff they can't always control. And it's those little micro things that it adds up. And so, yeah, when you can say, like, recognize, you know, how often they're criticized and how often and they all take it in. Girls do internalize much more than boys do, I think, but because that's what we're trained to do, sadly, that it really does make a difference when you can say, "Look, I am saying this because I love you," and that's always going to be there, and I try to call it feedback versus criticism, and I will often say, "Now, are you open to some feedback?" So then it is not
eh,
just me throwing shit at them. There's a
mm.
little bit more of a give and take with it. So it d not always, I'm
A
still learning
buy-in.
that, but yeah, exactly. Buy in for it. Okay, so there are so many more questions I would love to ask, but we're running out of time. We'll have to maybe do a part two of this.
Yeah, I'd be honored.
So let's get to the rapid fire round. The rapid fire round, I'm going to throw some questions at you, and you just answer whatever's top of your mind. All right.
Mhm.
So, question one: what is the one ADHD quote unquote hack or trick that you swear by?
Exercise and activities. So if I'm starting to get antsy, I'll, do push-ups and whatnot, or I'll walk around the block and then come back to the task. So if I getting a block, writer's block, if you will, or getting antsy and not thinking clearly and getting hit by my ADHD, I get a little bit of adrenaline and physical activity, and then I'm usually back to kind of calming down and being able to focus.
All right, I love it. A book, podcast, or tool you recommend most to parents of neurodivergent kids?
Driven to Distraction by Ned Hallowell is a good one. Another one to help parents with, I think, kids with conditioning, with how to have a good survival instinct, is a Holocaust memoir called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Mm,
And I think that's a good one for adults who are struggling with ADHD and parents who are teaching ADHD kids. And then if you want to just learn more about what this mind is, Driven to Distraction by Ned Hallowell is a wonderful work.
yeah, I really like his stuff. What is one thing about the education system you'd change overnight?
I would I would triple good teachers' pay.
Oh, I love that. Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Quit making them pay for their own stuff. It's so many things. Okay. Anyway,
Mhm.
what's a misunderstood trait of ADHD you wish more people celebrated?
that they're disinterested or not paying attention. A lot of times they are, but they have a hard time with eye contact or
Mhm.
staying on task, and they're hearing it or they're trying to just make sense out of the noise out of the left, but that they're not trying to be impolite and they're not trying to come across as disinterested.
Very well said. All right, I really want to thank you so much for being here. This has been so great, and we will definitely have to do a part 2 of this because I had so many more questions to ask.
Well,
But
thanks,
I also
Jorie.
know who my audience is, and there's only so much that they can sit. So, all right, and I know that people listening have learned a lot today as well. So, where can people reach you?
I have my own website. It's my name, brianmarkrigg.com. And then my books are on Amazon, but they can contact me if they have any questions and so on. I have my email on my website. If they have some follow on questions from this podcast, I'd be happy to answer them.
Awesome. And I will be sure to have all of his information in the description as well. So, to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got a lot out of it today. And let me know, what was your biggest takeaway from the conversation today? And if you are a woman who is ready to start understanding your ADHD brain so you can finally make your system stick and you want some help to do this, I do work with clients one on one. And you can click on the link in the description to apply for a clarity call to see if working together would be a good fit. All right. Lastly, if this show resonated with you, please give us a follow, leave a review or a comment, and share this with a friend who could use it. I'm pretty sure you all have at least one. There is a link in the description that makes it super easy to leave a review. And the more people who do this, the more ADHD women we can help. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you again, Brian, for being here. This has been so great.
Thanks for having me.
This is ADHD Ann with Jorie Houlihan. And until next time, stay curious.